worry in her eyes. "What do you mean?" I replied, still annoyed. "She was the one who attacked me for no reason." Clara looked at me intently as if hesitating to say something. "That girl is the daughter of a witch," she finally said. "Everyone here knows it, and it's best not to mess with her." I nervously laughed, thinking it was just village superstitions. But there was something in Clara's look and in the way the girl had stared at me that left me uneasy. We decided not to tell my grandmother to avoid worrying her. The days following the festival were a nightmare. I suddenly fell ill for no apparent reason. I began to have high fevers, vomiting, and a constant feeling of weakness. At first, I thought it was just the flu or a stomach infection, but the symptoms worsened over time. I spent nights in bed, sweating and shaking, feeling as if something dark and heavy was pressing down on my chest. My grandmother and Clara were worried. They tried home remedies, teas, herbs, and cold baths, but nothing seemed to work. It was then that my grandmother decided it was time to seek help. One morning, she came into my room with an expression I had never seen on her face. "Don't be scared, my daughter, but I'm going to bring a healer," she said in a firm voice. I wasn't in a position to argue. I couldn't take the pain and discomfort anymore, so I weakly nodded. Clara went to find him, and an hour later, an older man, with a weathered face from the sun and years, entered my room. He brought with him a cloth bag full of herbs, amulets, and other things I couldn't identify. The man looked at me closely as if he could see something that I couldn't. He asked me to tell him everything that had happened in the past few days, and when I reached the part about the festival and the altercation with the girl, my grandmother, who had been silent until then, interrupted me. "That family?" she murmured in a tense voice. "They practice witchcraft. People have always said it's not safe to mess with them." A chill ran down my spine. I remembered the girl's look, the hatred in her eyes, and a knot formed in my stomach. Could it be possible? Had she really done something to me? The healer said nothing more. He immediately got to work. He lit candles and burned herbs. The room filled with a strong smell. He began reciting prayers while moving herbs around my body. I felt as if an energy current was flowing through me, as if something heavy was moving through me, something I couldn't see. As he continued, I began to feel a little lighter. The weight on my chest lessened and my fever started to drop. I felt a part of me, the one filled with fear and anxiety, relax, allowing me to breathe more easily. It felt like an eternity. The healer finished, looked at me seriously, and told me that I should leave the village as soon as I could, that I needed to stay away from that family, especially that girl, to avoid any further harm. My grandmother and Clara nodded, and even though I was weak, I knew I had to listen. That same afternoon, when I was able to get out of bed, I began packing my things. I felt exhausted, but at the same time relieved, as if a shadow had lifted from me. The next day, I said goodbye to my grandmother and Clara, promising them that I would return soon, though deep down I knew it would be a long time before I came back. As the bus pulled away from the village, I couldn't help but think about that girl and the way she had looked at me with so much hatred. I didn't know what I had done to deserve that, but I understood that sometimes envy and resentment can drive people to do unimaginable things. I also understood that there are things in this world that we cannot explain, dark forces that surround us and can affect us. Since then, I have tried to avoid crossing paths with people who transmit that negative energy. I don't know if it was witchcraft or if they really gave me the evil eye, but I know that what I lived through was real. No matter how modern and rational we think we are, there are things in this world that defy all understanding, things we're better off not getting involved with. Ghost bus. I've been driving for the TN line for 20 years and have seen it all on the road. Accidents, animals crossing in the middle of the night, even cars that seem to come out of nowhere at full speed. But what happened to me on that route from Monterey to Caliana is something I can't forget. Believe me, I've tried to avoid talking about it. It's a story that few people know because I don't want to be thought of as crazy, but maybe after all this time it's time to tell it. That night, the weather was calm and the road was clear. Everything seemed to indicate it would be a smooth journey. My bus was half full, with passengers who had boarded in Monterey and, as is common on night trips, had fallen asleep as soon as we set off. The silence in the cabin was only interrupted by the faint hum of the engine and the static of the radio, which I kept on so I wouldn't feel so alone. Everything was fine until, halfway through, I came across something that didn't make sense. In front of me, in the distance, appeared a bus from another line. It wasn't unusual to find other vehicles on the road, but what surprised me was that it was a second-class bus. I had never seen one on this route, especially not at this hour. I approached, curious to see which line it was from, but the fog and darkness prevented me from clearly making out the name or logo. I tried to pass it since it was going slower than I wanted to maintain, but when I did, the bus suddenly accelerated. It was as if the driver didn't want me to pass him. I tried again, and this time he became more aggressive, moving to the center of the road and forcing me to brake to avoid a collision. I was shocked by his behavior. What kind of driver would do such a thing? I stayed behind, waiting for a safe opportunity to pass, but then he started doing something that sent chills down my spine. Every so often he would brake suddenly as if he wanted me to catch up and crash into him. It was as if he were playing with me, as if he enjoyed watching me struggle to keep control of the bus. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my body. My mind was racing, trying to understand what the hell was happening. In one of the turns, the bus sped up and disappeared from my sight. It happened so quickly that I didn't have time to react. I stayed for a few seconds in the curve, waiting to see it come out on the other side, but there was nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed it. I accelerated a bit, trying to catch up or at least see it again, but nothing. The road was empty in front of me. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew something wasn't right. What had just happened was not normal at all. I continued driving, but the unease didn't leave me. That's when I heard it, a loud, terrifying sound as if something big had crashed hard. I braked instinctively, and at that moment the screams started. They were human screams, cries, as if I were hearing people suffering, people in panic. Along with the screams, there was the sound of twisting metal, breaking glass, and what sounded like explosions. My passengers began waking up, alarmed by the noise. Some asked what was going on, while others looked around, confused. I didn't know what to say. I felt cold sweat running down my back and my hands were trembling on the steering wheel. I'm going to stop for a few minutes. Please stay calm, I announced in the calmest voice I could manage, though inside I was on the verge of panic. I pulled over to the side of the road and got off the bus, telling them I was going to walk a few meters to calm down. The cool night air hit my face, but it didn't make me feel better. Everything was still there in my head, the sound of the crash, the screams, the crying. I looked around, hoping to see some sign of the bus that had been in front of me, but there was nothing. The road was completely empty and silent. I went back to the bus, and after a few minutes the passengers looked at me with curiosity and concern, but no one said anything. I got back in the cabin and after a moment resumed the journey. The rest of the trip was calm, though the sense of strangeness and terror never left me. I arrived in Galana and dropped the passengers off, each heading their own way. Another trip as if nothing had happened. Believe me, friends, I couldn't stop thinking about what happened that night. I wondered if it had been just my imagination, maybe I was tired and had seen things that shouldn't have been there. But the sounds, the screams, I heard them clearly and it wasn't something I could have just imagined. The next day, I asked other drivers if they had seen the second-class bus on the route that night, but no one knew what I was talking about. None of my colleagues reported seeing anything strange. I tried to investigate further, but I couldn't find anything that explained what I had seen. There were no reports of accidents in the area I had passed through. Over time, I stopped talking about it. I didn't want to be thought of as crazy. There was something in the way the other drivers looked at me when I mentioned it, something that made me uncomfortable. There are nights when I still dream about it. I see that bus in front of me speeding up and disappearing into the darkness, followed by those horrible sounds. I don't know what it was, honestly, a ghost, an illusion, or maybe an echo of some accident that happened in the past. But I know it was real, what I lived through. Since then, every time I drive on that route, I can't help but look in the rearview mirror, hoping to encounter that damn bus again.